Hey students, so today we're going to talk about the violin, okay? So as you can see on the screen, I have the different parts of the violin and I'm going to point to them and show them to you on my violin, okay? So if you have your violin with you, feel free to get it out and also maybe point to the parts as I'm introducing them, okay? So the first part we have right here is called the scroll. And you can see it actually kind of curves around, right? Like maybe like an old scroll, like when people would come out and then read what was written on that piece of paper and it was all curled up. That's kind of what this looks like too. Then we have the pegs, okay? And they're these little black knobs right here. And those pegs sit inside what's called the peg box, which you can see how they go through, okay? Now, these pegs are really important because they're for tuning the strings, which we have here, okay? And we'll talk about that in a second. Generally, right, you won't touch the pegs unless I ask you to do so, okay? You can tighten the strings by moving the pegs backward, okay, away from you, and you can loosen the strings, making them lower by turning them towards you. But remember, don't touch unless I ask you to, okay? All right, so then we get to this part here, this black part called the fingerboard. And that's because that's the only place where our fingers should really go on the violin. Our fingers are covered with dirt and oil, and we really don't want that to get onto our violin, okay? It does get on there anyway because of, when we hold the violin and we do touch the violin sometimes, not on purpose, but even sometimes on accident. So oil will get onto the violin no matter what, but it's really important that we try to keep as much of the touching to the fingerboard as possible, okay? And that's where our fingers actually go on the strings to make a sound, okay? And I'll demonstrate that in just a little bit. So on the fingerboard, we also have what's called the nut. And if you look, there's this slightly raised part or like, I don't know, like little rectangle going across the top there. That's called the nut, okay? That kind of helps us understand how far to put our fingers on the violin when we're first starting out. You might have tapes on your violin already, but if you don't, and you don't want to put them on, then I'll instruct you how far away from the nut to put your fingers on the violin, okay? All right, so now that whole entire fingerboard runs along what's called like the neck of the violin, okay? So just like we have a neck, the violin also has a neck, okay? And that's where our thumb and kind of like the crook between our thumb and our index finger is going to sit on the violin, just like that, okay? All right, moving down, we have the body of the violin, okay? So just like the violin has a neck, we have a neck. Just like the violin has a body, we have a body, right? And on this body, on the sides of the body are what are called the ribs, just like we have ribs, right? The violin has ribs on either side, okay? All right, so now we have these little holes here called F holes. And if in music class you've ever learned the word forte, you can see that the holes are actually in the shape of those fancy Fs for that dynamic forte, which means loud. Now these Fs are just a shape, right? They don't necessarily mean anything, but they do help the violin produce sound, okay, out of the instrument. So there's holes for a reason. If it was covered up, we wouldn't be able to hear the sound, okay? So if you look deep inside the violin, and you can kind of see it right here, there's a little pole that sticks up there, and that's called our sound post. That's probably one of the most important elements on our violin because it holds everything up, okay? None of this stuff is really held down by glue, okay? Like the strings aren't held down by glue. The sound post isn't held down by glue, right? It's actually held down by pressure and tension. So if that sound post falls, it's kind of scary because the rest of the stuff on your violin could also kind of fall or come off. You don't want that to happen. So if the sound post falls, you should immediately tell your parents, okay? And then they should probably call wherever you got your violin from. If it was Music and Arts, they should call Music and Arts. If you got it online, you should let me know because then we can take it to somebody called a luthier who could fix and put the sound post back up for you, okay? That doesn't usually happen, but that's why we have to take really good care of our violin when we hold it and when we put it away and take it out of the case, okay? Just a few more parts and then we're good to go. So we have this part right here, okay? And I always talk about this part is how if you look at the strings, they have to run across the fingerboard over this little part of the body to what's called the tail piece here. So yes, now the violin has a tail, right? We don't have a tail, but maybe your dog or your cat does. So this part right here is called the bridge. So the strings run along the fingerboard over the bridge, right? And then to the tailpiece, okay? Now the bridge is really important. If that falls down, then your strings don't make a sound because the bridge is pretty much held up by the sound post and also the tension that comes from tightening the strings, okay? So if that falls, you should definitely let me know and we can try to fix that together, okay? All right, now, one more part, or maybe two more parts, I should say. This right here is called the chin rest, okay? That's where your chin is going to sit on the violin, okay? Now, the last part might look different on your violin, which is on the back, and that's called the shoulder rest. Now, my shoulder rest has little feet on it, okay? And they hook on either end of the violin body. But your shoulder rest might just be a sponge, a gray sponge, which is totally okay. It'll work for you. And you'll have a rubber band. If you have that rubber band, you're going to take it and put it on one of the ribs right here, and then stretch it, put it on the other rib right here. And if you can stretch it even further, you're going to put it on this little black dot here called the button. And you're going to secure it over the button like that, okay? Then you'd take your sponge and you'd slip it under the rubber band that's on the back of your violin so that when you go to put your violin up to your left shoulder, you feel a bit more secure here, okay? If you don't have a shoulder rest, the violin might slip and slide and also might hurt you because of your collarbone right on your chest, okay? So we don't want that to happen. I definitely recommend using some type of shoulder rest, whether it looks like mine or it's a sponge, okay? So one more time, I'm just going to do a speed round of the different parts of the violin. We have the scroll, we have the pegs, we have the peg box, the strings, and we have 4 of them, right? G, D, A, and E, okay? We have the fingerboard, the neck, the body, the ribs, the F holes, okay? The bridge, the sound post, the tailpiece, the chin rest, and the shoulder rest. Now, one last part that we didn't mention were these little knobs right here, okay? And those are called the fine tuners. Those are what we're going to use to make adjustments to our strings, whether the strings need to sound higher in pitch or lower in pitch. So by turning them to the right, righty-tighty, the pitch will get higher. By turning it to the left, lefty-loosey, the strings will get lower in pitch, okay? I'll always tell you how to move them, and I'll help you figure that out. So don't touch them just yet until I help you out, okay? Your violin probably has all 4. Mine only has 1, but all 4 do the same thing, but they belong to one string and one string only. So just make sure that when I do ask you to turn the fine tuners, you find the one that matches the string you need, okay? All right, boys and girls, well, that's the violin. Stay tuned because we're going to do a whole other video for the bow as well as how to hold it and how to play. All right? Okay, see you later.